Okay, so I'm about to show you a photograph of my own, since one of the topics for paper number two is partly about writing about a family photograph. So I'm going to show you what I always a photo that I always enjoy bringing into the classroom when I'm in my normal in-person classes, because it never fails to get a laugh out of the classes usually. So here it is. So here's a photograph. Here's a family photograph from, of course, my family. And I'm showing you this because I want to talk about the structure for paper number two. And I'm going to go with topic number one. And I'm going to go with topic number one for this purely practical reason that I have more family photos, to be honest, here than I do have like vacation photos. I have some, but the family photos I have are more fun. And I figure that's a good example to show you. Now, before I talk any further about this photograph of mine, and how I might write about this if I were doing topic number one. Keep in mind for the second paper, there's 3 topics. And this is why I'd said with paper number one, make sure to read over the directions, because as we go forward, you'll have more options. So, paper number one, you had the one option, right? You had to do, a discussion of a job or, maybe a family member's job and sort of compare it and discuss it in terms of the micros essay. So in this one, we do have an essay that we're using as the basis for this paper. That's the Susan Sontag. The Dwayne Johnson will fit in a little bit too, but I'll talk about that in a separate video. That's very similar to the Toni Morrison in the sense that it's more of a supplementary reading than one we're directly focusing on in this paper. But for this assignment, there's 3 topics to choose from. You could write about a family photograph like this one. You could write about a vacation photo, with family or friends, or you can write about a photo in the news. So any one of those is valid. The structure, though, is the same. So that's what I want to stress first. The structure for this paper is the same no matter which of the 3 topics you select from. So in a second, I'm going to, pull over this my whiteboard here and go through some of these details and explain how I want you to try to structure this essay. But before I do that, let's imagine, for example, that you have a photo like this one. Now, you can probably guess already if you can see it. I'm sure you can't see it that well, but you probably see enough of the details. That's me at my first birthday in November of 1974. Okay, November 26, 1974. So there I am. There's my mom. There's my maternal grandmother, so my mom's mom, Patricia Stango. My great aunt, my mom's aunt, Annie Grigoritis, who I should mention we all live next to each other because it was a very typical kind of immigrant neighborhood where my parents and my sister, my grandmother and I were in one house. Across the street was my great grandmother who'd been born in Lithuania in 1890 and didn't speak English. My great aunt lived across the street. My great uncle lived across the street. So everybody, all these Lithuanians had moved near each other, especially after they'd gotten here from Lithuania. So everybody was nearby. So this is in our kitchen when I was a kid, and these are my dad's parents, my maternal or paternal, grandparents, James Cremens and Mary Bowen Cremens, who were born in Ireland, and they didn't live across the street, but they lived just a few miles away in the next town over. So again, it's very typical. I had a very typical kind of immigrant kind of upbringing with, everybody in the house, in my house, immediately speaking 2 different languages and, having all these stories from the old country. And if it wasn't the Lithuanians, it was the Irish on my dad's side when we'd go visit my grandmother, or it was the Italians on my mom's side. I didn't know the Italians as well as I did these other 2 parts of the family. Anyway, all that is to say, here's a photograph from my very first birthday party. One thing you're probably going to notice, and I've asked her about this, is that my mom and I seem to be dressed identically. And so I asked her fairly recently, I said, did you make my clothes so that we would match? And she said, no, I didn't do that. And I think she did, but we won't get into that. We do match very nicely with the ensemble that we have. And my mom looks very hippie-ish because it's 1974. So she's got a long black hair. It's a little shorter now. That she's in her 70s. So why am I showing you this photo? Because again, if I were doing topic number one, this might be a photo that I would write about. And how would I write about it? Well, let me turn my attention to my outline now. So if you want to pause the video right now, this would be a time to take some notes. I'll post more details on this too on our announcements later this week. But here are some basic ideas for this paper. This is the basic structure. This structure, by the way, is a pretty straightforward basic structure that you would use for most of your college papers, most academic papers roughly follow this kind of structure. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in most college papers, in most academic papers, you're going to need an introduction with a thesis. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Now, in this case, with this paper, you have to tell me what photo it is you're writing about. So within the first 3 or 4 sentences of the paper, I need to know what the photo is. Again, if I were writing about this one, I would say, well, here's a photo from my first birthday party with my mom. My dad, I'm sure, took the photo. And then it's my grandparents, my dad's parents, and my grandmother and my great aunt. My grandfather on my mom's side had passed away about 13 years or so before I was born. So sadly, I never got to meet him. Although I do still wear his ring. My mom gave me this ring that he wore all the way through the 30s, all the way through World War II. So this is my kind of connection with him, even though I sadly was never able to meet him. Anyway, so in your introduction, I need to know what the photo is. So if I were writing about this, I would say just what I told you. I'd say, I'm going to be writing about a photograph of me at my first birthday party with my grandparents and my great aunt and my mom, and some of the memories that are evoked by this photo and some of the significance of it. Now, for the thesis of this paper, which should be at the end of your opening paragraph, you do need to respond to Sontag. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the previous video, I had mentioned to you the different parts of the essay and where they connect in to the prompt. So for example, if you're doing topic number 1, you know, on pages 8 and 9 of the essay, that's where Sontag talks about family photographs. So part of your job with this paper is not only to tell me about your photo, but also to respond to Sontag. So what do you think about her ideas? If you're doing topic number 1, your thesis should explain your response to what she says about family photos. She says that they were a way, and they continue to be a way, for families to feel connected, even though they're not physically together anymore. Okay, or you know, either because they've traveled elsewhere, or they've moved out of town, or someone's passed away. So that first topic is about family photos and their meaning. Now, for Sontag, the significance of a family photo is that connectedness. I think she uses that term too, how families are connected through these photographs, not only immediate family members, but family members from the past, family members that we no longer have the opportunity to see because they're no longer with us. So part of your thesis will be explaining your response to Sontag. If it's topic number 2, I mentioned in last week's video that her discussion of vacation photos is very comical. It's got a sense of humor to it because she kind of makes fun of them, makes fun of people taking too many photos. So if you're writing about topic 2, you might need to disagree with her and say, well, I enjoy my vacations and I don't just take photos on vacations because I want to waste time and I feel that I should be working instead. So if you're doing topic 3, same thing. You got to look at her commentary about news photography on the last couple of pages of the article and think about what you think about her opinion. So how would you respond to her? And that's part of your thesis. So it's not just about talking on the photo, but it's also talking about the photo you've selected through the lens or through the ideas that she's given you in her article. And you could agree with her, you could disagree with her, you can add some commentary to it. So that's your thesis. It's a little more complex and involved than the one from the first paper, but that's sort of where we're headed. And you guys did, you know, a very nice job on your first papers. You got a lot of nice details in them. So this is just an extension where we're building on the skills that we developed in that first paper, structuring it, giving descriptions of the job, quoting from Mike Rose. So we're just adding on to that, which leads me to the next part of the paper. And again, this is a very typical structure. Paragraphs 2 and 3 of your essay, so as you get into the middle, should focus on Sontag. Paragraph 2 should have the first of your 2 quotations from Sontag. Find a line from her in the article that you find interesting, quote it, and then discuss it. At the end of the directions, I've shown you how to do that, how to introduce the quotation, how to quote it, and then how to explain it in a little bit more detail. And I'll do a separate video where I just focus on that this week. But that's what your second and third paragraphs are going to be about. And I mentioned that here. And that's pretty typical. In most college papers, academic papers, we call that a literature review. That doesn't mean you're reviewing her story or her essay. What that means is that you're showing the reader that you've done the reading and that you have some expertise in it and that you have an opinion on it. And so in most papers, especially longer research papers, you want to have your thesis in your introduction. And then in the first part of the paper, you want to acknowledge the sources that you use. So you want to cite them, you want to comment on them, you want to give more of your opinion on them. That's the first part of the body. So for this paper, since it's a 3-pager like the last one, use paragraphs 2 and 3 of the body of the paper after the introduction to quote from Sontag and to comment on her. And that gives you your foundation. You don't want to wait till the end of the paper to discuss Sontag because she's part of the ideas that you're using in this essay. So get her out of the way first. Then when you get to what would now be the one introduction, second paragraph, third, fourth paragraph, I got to make sure I'm keeping this straight. Fourth and fifth paragraphs of this paper, that's where you want to discuss your photograph. Describe to me what's in it. Tell me who's in it. Tell me how it relates to what Sontag says. So again, just to go back to this example, this would be a great example of the connectedness of my family because my mom, thankfully, is still with us. I'm still here. But my grandmother and my grandfather and my other grandmother, my great aunt, they've all passed away. My grandfather passed away not long, I think, after this photo was taken. So I don't have any memories of him. My Irish grandma here, Grandma Cremens, passed away in the early 80s. My grandmother here, again, who lived with us until she passed away in the 90s, I was very close to her and to my aunt because they basically raised me when my mom was first teaching high school in the 1970s. So if I were writing about this, I would say, absolutely, I agree with you, Susan Sontag. This reminds me of the connectedness within my family of all these extended family members that I knew sometimes well, sometimes not as well when I was a kid. And this idea that I have them in a photo is very meaningful to me. It's as meaningful to me, to be honest, as this ring that I wear from my grandfather. In fact, you know what? I'll show you a picture of him because I keep him over my drawing table here. Here's my grandfather on my mom's side, Nunzio Stango. That's the Italian side of the family. He was born here in the States. His parents were born over in Frigento in Italy in the turn of the century. But this photo that I have of him that my sister made me a copy of is meaningful to me because I never had the opportunity to meet him. So there's that connectedness back to a relative that I never met, but I've heard so much about over the years. This is my great grandmother, by the way, on the Italian side. And then my grandmother here in this photo in the 1930s, early 40s, actually, because this is my grandfather in his uniform. He was in the army and was in Tunisia in the desert in the Northern Africa campaign of World War II in 1943 and got back here to the States in early 44. I think he finished his tour of duty. So I think this is probably from before he left for Tunisia with the rest of his battalion. Anyway, I show you that because these are the photos that are significant because we can pay tribute to our ancestors, right? That's a way of looking back at them and remembering them and carrying on these stories. So no matter which of the topics that you do, tell me what I'm seeing, describe it to me. If it's a news photograph, you can do the same thing. You can respond to Sontag, and you can also describe the photo that you're seeing. Tell me what's in it. Tell me how you responded to it. That's really critical. So you want at least 2 paragraphs of description on the photo. Who is in it? Why is it meaningful to you? Why did you decide to write about it? How does it relate back to the ideas in Sontag's essay? Okay, that's the second half of the paper. And hopefully that makes sense as to why you need the details from Sontag first, because if you analyze the photograph and you haven't given any quotations from Sontag, the reader's not going to know what the foundation of the paper is. They're going to say, well, where are these ideas coming from? That's why you want to get all that Sontag quotation out of the way first and then get into your discussion. And then after you've done that, then you do your conclusion, because your conclusion is a way to just bring everything together and to reflect on what you've written about in the previous parts of the paper. So let me sum that up. I know that's a lot, and it's a lot of family photos of mine that you just had to look at. So let me go back through this. So for this paper, it's actually very similar to the structure that we use for paper number 1. It's pretty much identical, but we just didn't have as much quoted sources. And therefore we didn't have this section at the beginning with Mike Rose, because you were really, as I said to you, that was more of a narrative paper. You were just purely telling me a story. This is an analytical paper where you're telling me some narrative parts, about your photo, but you're also analyzing it in terms of Sontag. So you got to acknowledge what you think of her before you can really get into that. So it's giving you the opportunity to work more with sources and to cite material. So to sum it up, introduction, tell me what photo you're writing about. Tell me how it relates to Sontag from your point of view. If you want to agree with Sontag's ideas, you can. If you want to disagree with them, you can. If you want to elaborate on them, you certainly can in your thesis. Body paragraphs, second, third paragraphs of the paper. That's where to put your citations. You need to have at least 2 quotations from Sontag's article in this. So that's where you'd place them. And if you look at the sample paragraph on Blackboard, you'll see how to place those kind of quotations into a paragraph. And I'll talk about that again separately in another video that I'm going to do this week. Next part of the paper, at least 2 paragraphs talking about your photograph. What's in it? How does it relate to Sontag? How does it support or refute her ideas, right? And again, be descriptive. And if it's a family photo, tell me about it. Who are these folks that I'm looking at? If it's a vacation photo, what kind of adventures did you have on this vacation? If you do topic number 3 and it's a news photo, why did you choose it? As I said, what was in it that made you interested in writing about it and in understanding Sontag's ideas about news photography? And then your last paragraph, as always, is kind of a reflection. It should tie together all the loose ends of the paper, offer any final thoughts that you have on Sontag in that last paragraph. All right. So again, that's a summary of how to structure this paper. As I just knocked a bunch of pens and pencils off my desk. Please let me know if you have any questions. As you can see from the structure of this is also why I mentioned last week in the video to start this paper as soon as you can, because there's more moving parts to it. There's more, there's not to say that there wasn't a lot of thinking in the first paper in terms of telling those stories, but in this one, you've got a lot of detail you want to pack in. You've got the analysis of Sontag, you've got the discussion of the photograph. It's a really fun paper to write. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, of course, you're an English professor. Of course, you think it's fun, but it really allows you to use your descriptive abilities as a writer to tell me what you're seeing. It allows you to use your analytical abilities because you're responding to Sontag. And most of all, I'm curious to see what you write about. I enjoy teaching this essay. I've done it for a long time. It is definitely one of the wordier, maybe a more complex ones, but it's worth it. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it. And I think it still remains relevant today, especially with all the social and digital media that we have. All right, so that's it for now. In the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to incorporate quotations and how to do it effectively and not feel overwhelmed by that aspect of writing these kinds of papers. So as always, please send me an email. I have open office hours later this week. I think it's on Thursday for your classes, right? Those are available if you want to talk to me at all, online, make a Zoom appointment. Or, again, send me a draft of the paper, or please send me any questions that you have as you get started working on this and as you read through these articles. All right. So if you have any other questions, like I said, send me an email. I hope you have a great evening, and I will see you in the next video.